Every 2 weeks, a language disappears somewhere in the world. Yes, a single language. And when that happens, it's not just vocabulary that disappears. Stories disappears, history disappears, humor disappears, ways of thinking disappear, connections disappear. A culture will suffer and die. So, who gets to keep their language? Hi everyone, this is Olivia, and welcome to the first episode of the new series where we explore endangered languages, language revival, sense of identity, and the future of language in an ever-changing globalized world. Before we talk about specific languages like Ainu, Māori, or Yiddish in future episodes, I think we first need to ask a basic question. What does it actually mean for a language to die? Well, first of all, what exactly is an endangered language? An endangered language is a language that is at risk of no longer being spoken in the future. Usually this happens when younger generations stop learning, remembering, or using the language regularly. A language becomes especially endangered when children are no longer speaking or practicing it at home. That idea is really important because a language does not survive simply because dictionaries or textbooks exist. It survives when people actually use it in daily life and pass it on between generations. You might also hear the term language death. That refers to the point when a language no longer has any native speakers left, or some consider a language dead when its second last speaker dies because then its last speaker has no one to talk to. There are different stages before that happens. Some languages are considered dormant, meaning they no longer have native speakers but are being revived or relearned by communities. A good example is the Wampanoag language in the United States, which has gone through revitalization efforts after no fluent native speakers remained for generations. Now they have hundreds of learners, dozens of speakers, and a growing dictionary of over 13,000 words. Other languages are extinct, meaning there are no remaining speakers and no active revival movement. One example is Ayak language, whose last native speaker passed away in 2008. And then there are dead languages, which sound similar to the extinct one but actually mean something different. A dead language is no longer spoken as a native language in everyday life, but may still exist in religious, academic, and/or historical contexts. For example, Latin and Sanskrit. There is no country that uses this language as an official language, but people still study and use them in certain contexts, even though they are not widely spoken in modern conversational languages. At the same time, thousands of living languages still exist around the world today, as we know, but even among living languages, not all are equally stable. Some languages have millions of speakers but limited official support. Others have very few speakers but strong revitalization efforts. So whether a language survives is not only about numbers, it's also about status, education, policy, and whether younger generations feel the language still has value. So what actually causes a language to become endangered? There isn't just one reason. Usually multiple factors work together over a long period of time. One major factor is political pressure. Throughout history, many governments promoted one national language in order to create unity, majority, or modernization. Minority languages were often discouraged in schools or public life. For example, indigenous children in different countries were sometimes punished for speaking their native languages at school. Sadly, this is not a historical context, as sometimes it still happens. Few years ago, a TV station in Japan caused a huge backlash because of the variety show. There was the actress from Okinawa, which is a prefecture having a Ryukyu dialect, and it was part of the show that she would be punished when speaking the dialect, but became a huge problem because speaking the Ryukyu dialect was actually punished in the historical context when annexed to Japan. I will be talking about this more in depth in the next episode. Anyways, over time, this creates a situation where parents stop teaching the language to their children because they believe another language will give them better opportunities. Economic pressure also plays a huge role. If speaking a dominant language increases access to education, jobs, or social mobility, people naturally prioritize that language. The biggest example of this is English. I've also got an example about this topic. Although there are various perspectives towards its success, some of the major Japanese companies have made English their official and common language. Not only that they are doing English education enthusiastically, but actually make it an official language as the country's. The another reason is the social pressure. Some languages become associated with being modern and educated or successful, while others become associated with being rural, old-fashioned, not beneficial, or less useful. And once shame or less value becomes attached to a language, younger generations may avoid using it publicly. This process is called individual language shift, where a person gradually changes from using one language to another in their daily lives, but when this happens across generations, it becomes an intergenerational language shift. That is when parents stop passing a language down to their children, and once that happens consistently, language endangerment accelerates very quickly. So, language shift is often not an individual choice in a simple sense, it is connected to systems around people. In some situations, language loss can happen surprisingly fast. This is sometimes called rapid speaker death. One example occurred during colonization in different parts of the world, where disease, forced assimilation, displacement, and boarding school systems drastically reduced indigenous populations and language transmission within just a few generations. In Australia, North America, and parts of Asia, entire communities lost speakers rapidly due to these policies. For example, in Australia, there was the language Palawakani, an Aboriginal language. It was spoken by people in Tasmania in the 19th century. However, the language was lost as people were forced to relocate due to European colonization of the land. However, gladly, in the early 1990s, the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre took on the monumental task of language reclamation. The project's linguists and Palawa community members began analyzing over 4,500 recorded words and phrases and reconstructed as the new Palawakani language. After 2 decades, Aboriginal people of all ages can now speak Palawakani, the language of Tasmanian Aborigines, and children learn it from an early age. Also, in North America, the languages included Yahi, Ayak, Lower Chinook, and Atacapa became extinct due to the effect of colonization and forced assimilation of indigenous North American population. Interestingly, language death does not always happen because people are physically forced to stop speaking a language. Sometimes it happens because people begin to believe another language is more valuable. That idea honestly reminds me of conversations around English education today. English is now considered an international language, and learning it absolutely creates opportunities. And I agree. But also, I personally think globalization and international communication are incredibly important as they are connected to each other. At the same time, many countries are now facing questions about how to protect local languages, dialects, and cultural identity while still participating globally. So the issue is not global versus local. The challenge is balance of languages. When a language disappears, what is actually lost? Of course, communication can continue in another language, but languages also contain cultural and historical memories. Some languages have words that cannot be translated directly because they reflect unique relationships with nature, spirituality, family structures, or emotion. Traditional stories, songs, humor, and oral history are often deeply connected to the structure of the language itself. So when a language disappears, communities may also lose part of their connection to previous generations. This is why some revitalization movements are not only about communication, they are about identity and reclaiming history. And this is something I found really interesting while studying in New Zealand. I was surprised by how visible Maori language and culture were in schools and public life. Even though Maori was once heavily suppressed, revitalization efforts helped reintroduce it into education, media, and everyday society. That completely changed the way I thought about endangered languages. I realized that languages do not only disappear, sometimes they come back. I will be creating an episode focusing on language revival, so stay tuned. So, what actually helps protect a language? Research shows that one of the biggest factors is education. If children learn a language early and regularly, especially in meaningful social contexts, the language has a much higher chance of surviving. Government policy also matters. Official recognition, bilingual education, media support, and funding for cultural programs can all strengthen language use. But at the same time, policy alone is not enough. People need to feel that the language still belongs in modern life. If a language is only treated as history, it becomes difficult for younger generations to connect with it personally. That's why many successful revitalization movements focus not only on preservation, but also on making the language usable and visible in everyday life. In this series, we're going to explore languages that are disappearing, languages that survived, and languages that are being reclaimed. But more importantly, we'll explore what language means beyond simply communication. Because language is not just a tool, It is memory, identity, history, cultural understanding, and self-expression. Thank you so much for listening to the first episode of Who Gets to Keep Their Language. I'll see you in the next episode.